Okay, so it's number 5. Is this one, but I can't tell it's number 5 because it doesn't give me the file name at all. I don't think I can do anything about these properties. Oh, wait a minute. 05. Oh, no, I can't do anything. Sometimes you can.
Well, you should be able to change the editor.
The title in there, yeah, the properties. Look, can't do anything. Right, just...
I got talked out of
Okay, welcome to Bess. We'll, I think, just wait for a couple more minutes for folks to come in. If one or more of the chairs appears to vanish from the stage, please call an ambulance. It's because we've fallen off the back of the stage. It's very easy to do. Yeah. Okay. Let's make a start. Welcome to Bess. Here is the notes. Well, it basically says that any statement you make here is a contribution to the IETF. I'll just leave it on the. I'm sure you've seen this many times this week. I will leave it up for a few seconds for you to digest. Yeah. Can folks at the back please close the door? Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay, blue sheets. There are 2 blue sheets making their way around the room. Please, can you sign them? And if you're the last one at the back, it would be greatly appreciated if you could pass them back towards the front, so eventually they arrive back here for us to take them to the Secretariat at the end of the meeting. Okay, we have 2. Sorry, if you come in the door, could you please close the door behind you? Or if you're standing by the door, could you please ensure it's kept closed? It's quite noisy out there. Thank you. We have 2 sessions, one today and one tomorrow. Here is the agenda, proposed agenda for today. There's 8 drafts and 1 working group status update. Any comments on the agenda for today? Okay, great. And here is the agenda for tomorrow. I suggest we bash this tomorrow. Okay, working group status update. So we've had no new RFCs published since the last IETF, but we have 2 in the RFC editors queue. That's the DCI EVPN overlay draft and the EVPN prefix advertisement draft. We have a number of drafts with Martin, our AD, or an IESG review that are listed on the slides. On the inter-subnet forwarding draft, there's an action on Ali to update the draft. Hoping to get that shortly. Do you want to make any comments on the?
Martin? Could you give us an update on your AD reviews? Thank you.
I should have been out of the room at that moment. No, I don't have that by heart.
So have you started?
So
any,
no.
have you started anything on NSA
Oh yeah,
PGP
I have.
control plane?
I have. No, come on. So don't push me because I'll be pushing the others. Jorge, where are you? Ali, where are you? No, he's not here. I have done 80 reviews on 4 documents, and I don't have any answer from authors on 4 of them. He knows, and I know. We've chatted a bit, so no, it's being covered. We all have day jobs, so don't worry. There are 2 others which I have recently added in my queue, which are NSH control plane, which I need to start trading, and VPLS multi-homing as well. So these 2 are the next 2 one. Shit happens, and but don't worry.
Thank you. Okay, we have quite a few. You've probably noticed on the list we've been pushing through quite a few working group last calls. So we have quite a few documents now sitting with us as the shepherds, waiting for reviews and for us to push the button to request publication. There's an action on LE to update the Ethernet, the EVPN virtual Ethernet segment draft. The IGMP MLD proxy is we're expecting an update imminently. We provided a review to the authors of the fast failover draft. I think we're still waiting for a response on that.
Yep.
Yeah. The MSDP SA interoperation draft for MVPN, I'm currently reviewing that for my Shepherd's review. The bump procedure updates, we need to review.
On this one, I have provided my review maybe last week. Yeah.
And the EVPN preference DF has just passed working group last call. And we have a long list of drafts that we believe are ready for, and the authors have indicated they think are ready for working group last call, and we will set up a schedule following this IETF to get those processed as well. So we know some of the authors have been quite eager to get on with that, and we are doing our best to get through the list. Do you want any further updates? Any updates on those from any of the authors in the room? Okay, thank you. And this slide just summarizes some working group document updates. So the first one is the EVPN per Modicast flow DF election. So we're waiting on an IGMP proxy draft to move forward, and we're expecting this to be ready for working group last call by the next IETF. The service chaining draft is currently parked, although the authors may want to revive that in future. And the EVPN fast DF recovery draft, so there's an existing implementation, but the draft has expired, and we need to get that updated as soon as possible, so we can request for working group last call. We adopted some new working group documents, including SRv6 services, the EVPN ISID CMAC flash draft, EVPN virtual hub, and MVPN seamless interoperability. Okay, and we have a number of documents that the authors have indicated, and we believe it's probably ready for us to run a working group adoption poll. I won't read through these, but you can see these on the slide. you want to run through some of these?
Okay, so regarding the regular updates that we are requiring from the offers, so sometimes it's working, sometimes it's not working. We are really expecting to get in between updates for all the editors of working group documents, so we can track if there is something going wrong or if you are blocked, and if we can probably help in any way. Yeah. So Yang models are really the one which are, progressing really slowly.
Right, this is Himanshu from Sienna. Both for L2VPN and EVPN, right? Yang models, as you say, we not make any progress in the last 6 months, but we are planning to finish it up as soon as possible. There are very few things left. I mean, always when you are at the last stage, the newer things crop up. People want different things in it, and we have recognized the needs and a couple of items that we need to. So we'll have to gather all the other co-authors and get it done before right after this meeting.
Okay. Do you need any help from our side, like setting up interim meeting or whatever to try to speed up the work, or do you handle it on your side?
Sorry, I didn't get it. Can you repeat?
My point is, do you need any help from
No.
our side?
No, we at the moment we don't need any help. I think we got a good handle on what we have to do with respect to the updates. But yeah, if we do need, we will reach out to you for any help we need. Okay. Thanks.
Just interrupt. Is there actually anyone who is planning an implementation EVP and Yang model? Could someone actually say that it's going to be useful? Could be you. I mean, because the topic came up on Open Config list, and there's going to be some effort to build one. So would be good to know what's going on.
Mankamna from Cisco. So I have a question about MVP and Yang. We have not been able to get any input from the authors. So do we need it to be taken over by someone else in the working group, or how do we want to make progress?
If you really feel that your comments are not addressed, yes, we can find someone else to take over.
So at least from the last 2 IETF, I don't see much of traction or much of email response as well. So
Okay.
I didn't get any input whether they really need help or they're not able to progress, what is stopping. So I don't, it's kind of one-way communication right now.
Okay. We can discuss offline to see the best way to proceed.
Yes, I think you're up first.
Should try it?
Okay. Good afternoon, folks. So I'll be talking on behalf of proxy draft author. And we had a working group last call, I think 2 weeks back, 2 or 3 weeks back, when working group last call passed for this document. And thanks to Jorge, he had pretty good comment. And one of the comment was about one field in the NLRI of route type 8. And after having multiple discussions among authors, we don't see that there is any real use case for that particular field. So we had a couple of options, and there is one proposal which I would like to bring to the working group and see the feedback from the room as well. And the scope of this change will be limited to multi-homing peers, and majority of the, I think, deployment are cases where most probably you will have same vendor multi-homing peers. And these routes are scoped within same ESI. So right now, the NLRI looks like in the left side, and it has, there is something called as a leave sync sequence number. And this route is nothing but IGMP leave. And we don't think that there is any use case where we have to send IGMP leave sequence number. And we did speak to a couple of vendors who have implementation, and none of them find any real use case for sequence number to be used. So one of the proposal is to keep it clean, remove that complete 4 bytes from the NLRI, and NLRI will look something like in the right side. Since there are already existing running code in the field who might be using the old version of NLRI, so one of the proposal was to, in the BGP, we would accept both of the routes. So it might come with NLRI, what is the new value, let's say that it is X, and it might come with X plus 4 bytes as well if it is implemented in the older version. Any questions, feedback?
John Scudder. Wouldn't it be a little less intrusive to just make that field reserved instead of having 2 variant encodings that the implementations have to support?
So there are already, I think, 2 variations of implementation today. One of that is without sequence number, and one of that is with sequence number. And
so we already have the worst case in the field, is what you're saying? Okay.
So I just want to bring up, like, for this work group consideration, the sequence number is part of a key for the BGP NNI for type 6 or type 8 EVPN routes. So I would request to support backward compatibility, because this is something we cannot take lightly. This is not part of attribute for the NNI. This is a BGP key. So if we support RR have length with without this sequence number as a key, it seems to me like in order to achieve this, the key has to be consistent. For people to support sequence number as a part of key, this has to be there, NNI, because this has been there, defined like this for past 3 years. So backward compatibility, that's a problem to take it out. It's a key, it's not an attributes. So if we support both, both RI need to be defined, which means route type, a same route will have 2 different formats. How we solve this issue, yeah.
Jeff Haas. So I'm going to build on the other 2 points made for slightly different reasons. I spend a large portion of my day job dealing with BGP incremental deployment issues and the negative consequences when you get it wrong. Mm-hmm. The general rule set that you're violating is that once a NLRI type for a given AFI-SAFI has been defined, you can't change it, because once you've changed the key or the syntax, the reaction that the receiving peer on receiving something it doesn't understand for whatever reason, that when it's syntactically incorrect, is to drop the session. So what you are showing up here is drop the session. If you want to make these things on a box by box change, that's partially what BGP capabilities are for. You can get variances that way, and it's like a patch situation if you really want to. It's not generally a good idea, because you then have to figure out how this flows across the entire network. My recommendation would be the field gets preserved even if it's considered useless. I would leave it to the experts on EVPN as to what that field should contain, but minimally, since it's a fixed byte value in the current PDU, stick zeros in there, whatever makes you happy, if that's a necessary thing. There's already precedent for that in like multi-protocol BGP has a field that used to be called SMPA. It hasn't been used for that since it was originally specified, and now in the update of the spec, it's just the magic zeros value. So don't be afraid to waste space in the NLRI, because the consequence is that what you're doing is basically potentially making the network unstable, making it drop sessions.
Yeah, thanks for your input about BGP session flap, I think one of the consideration was to accept both of the key length.
Unfortunately, the problem is that for it to accept both of them, you'd have to change the route type. If you're willing to define basically a version 2 of this route type and allow for the procedures to do that, that would be acceptable. But if you can't change the existing one because you have code out there that will treat in either direction, it is a syntax error. I'm going to offer a little bit of reading for you. Please check the minutes to pull up the discussion point. But attribute 128 for BGP was a thing that got deployed that had 2 different parse formats, 2 different code bases, all from my employer. And the negative consequence in that case was global internet outages.
Thanks.
I can go ahead.
Jorge Rabadan, Nokia. I think we have an issue no matter what, because there are 2 shipping implementations in the field with different route key, with or without the sequence number. So what I would do, I mean, this presentation is very good because it raises awareness of the issue, but I would also send an email to the list so that, you know, other vendors with potential implementations can also say something about it. And yeah, my preference still would be to remove something that it has no use in the route.
Thanks. And about sending mail to the list, I think 2 weeks back I had already sent email with these details, what is in the slide deck. So though I didn't receive any response yet in the list.
So Chris Bowers, Juniper Networks. I mean, it's good to raise awareness of the issue, but you know, you're asking for feedback from the working group, but not really supplying the information about the actual implementations, right? You've sort of presented this as if it's a green, you know, this is the draft 02 of this, whereas they're shipping implementations. So it would really be good to actually go into the details of the backwards compatibility and say, okay, there are multiple implementations doing things differently, and saying this would be the impact of doing this, this would be the impact of doing this, and really get into that detail as opposed to sort of a hypothetical, you know, oh, if we're designing this from scratch, what would it be? So in your email to the list, it would be good to actually get into that level of detail because, you know, someone's going to be unhappy with the final decision, I believe.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So maybe you can reply in the list. I'll provide whatever details are needed.
Keyur Patel Arcus. I know you talked with me about this, and sorry if I was jet lagged back then, but if you're going to take that filled out, you have an existing implementations, and if they're doing a strict NLRI check, there's a chance you might bounce a session. If you want to take the filled out, maybe you want to use some kind of a capability exchange to indicate the new NLRI field or the size has been changed. I'm not sure if the implementations out there are doing a strict checking on the size, which also brings a question is that do you really need to change at this time? Or can you leave it as it is and be done with it?
Okay.
Hello, I'm Haibo Wang from Huawei. Because we think that if you delete this circle number, although it may be no some use, but you must consider how to interoperate with other vendors, because some vendors have implemented this, and also many operators want many vendors to interoperate with each other.
So I think it is same input as what I got from others, that we'll have to provide more details. So in this slide deck, I didn't put all the text which was supposed to be put in the draft itself, that how to handle these different cases. So those details, maybe I'll send it in the list.
Very last comment.
Yeah. So Satya from Cisco. So would it be less intrusive if we just, add a knob as we discussed some minutes back? So clearly this routes are only for like multi-home PEs, right? They don't need to go to different EAs. So maybe we can consider that too.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Keep discussing on the list because this is an important issue that we have to solve.
Hi, good afternoon. So just fairly quick updates. This draft's been discussed a few times before, so not significantly new. So just a quick reminder, this is essentially a mobility draft that details mobility procedures and sequence number assignment procedures across various EVP and IRB scenarios, as well as duplicate address detection procedures across these scenarios. What's changed since the last revision? There's basically one new section on mobility convergence, which essentially details specific triggers where ARP or ND probes may be used to speed up mobility convergence. And it also kind of shows how the fundamental idea within the draft that is used for sequence number inheritance may also be used for this specific convergence scenarios. So in terms of overall status, it's, I mean, it's a fairly stable draft. It's already has multiple implementations. It is already in the working group last call queue. But any other comments before the last call, happy to take them. Any questions or anything at this point? Okay. The next one. Okay, so this one's also been discussed a few times before. This is, again, just recapping, this is essentially defines handling or usage for link bandwidth attribute in route type 1 for unequal load balancing of overlay unicast traffic from remote PEs based on ESI bandwidth distribution, as well as defines usage of link bandwidth attribute in route type 4 for DF election for the ESI in proportion to the bandwidth distribution for that ESI. For the DF election part, it essentially defines how the link bandwidth attribute is to be used for each of the 4 odd DF election algorithms that are defined today. So no major updates since last time. I mean, the last update to the draft was essentially addition of weighted HRW DF election, which is Satya's draft. Again, from draft perspective, this is ready for last call. It's been fairly stable. There was an AI last time to kind of check on the implementation status from Cisco side. I did check. It has not been implemented yet. It is fairly close. It's kind of like in design, but it's not implemented yet. So I wanted to kind of, you know, also check with any other vendors, anyone else who's aware of any other implementations, to let the authors know. That's it on this one. Any questions, comments? Okay. So PEC control plane for EVPN. This is a draft that was first presented in Prague a couple of IETFs back. Since then, it has gone through a couple of revisions and a couple of name changes that I will cover. Just to recap, without going into all the details again, it's essentially defines a PEC control plane for Mac IP and prefix learning. The main motivation behind this draft is essentially to provide an alternative, a control plane based alternative for learning that is decoupled from data plane traffic for simplicity and more deterministic behavior, as well as, I mean, the biggest sort of use case that has been kind of detailed in the draft is essentially how it simplifies a lot of the learning and convergence scenarios, particularly across a multi-homing lag based learning. So revisions since it was last presented, there's a new use case that's been added. It's essentially, it has extensions added for a CE to be able to signal a desired SLA to an EVPN PE. That's essentially extends the existing MAC and MAC IP TLVs that are defined in the draft to also carry a desired SLA value to the PE. And the main idea there is essentially to enable an EVPN or the set of EVPN PEs to be able to provide an SLA-based service to a CE, which is essentially be able to route or bridge traffic to that CE on traffic engineered paths in order to meet the CE requested SLA. The other changes that it's kind of gone through, L3DL protocol that this draft is based on as the underlying protocol has gone through some revisions. It was LSOE earlier and now it's L3DL. So it basically incorporates changes that have happened in the base protocol to be in sync with the latest L3DL spec. Other than that, it's basically replaces these older versions. The first one was called EVPN LSOE, and the next one was called EVPN L3DL. The draft does also now explicitly mention with the work happening on LLDPv2 that even though the draft is currently based entirely on L3DL, there are future extensions possible to incorporate new underlying protocols like LLDPv2. And that is kind of reflected in the name change for the draft as well. Overall status, it is still work in progress, largely. So, yep. Any input, interest, comments, more than happy to collaborate and take feedback. Any questions? Anything? Okay, cool. Give you 5 minutes back.
Hello. So I'll be providing an update on on two drafts, the port active draft and the single flow active load balancing draft. So what's changed since the last version in the last IETF is so we received feedback to add a capability bit for the port mode. So that's been added to the draft. The section 4 essentially was going over the port active DF mode, and what we did is we expanded an entire section to address essentially the orthogonal the orthogonality, sorry, of this new P bit and the 3 existing DF election modes. So we added a section for essentially the RFC 7432 DF election, the modulo-based one, with a change that we received, I forget if it was on the alias or at the last IETF, to select a different byte for the modulo operation, or a different set of bytes, sorry, just to get better entropy, as opposed to the prior version where we were using the last byte of the ESI. And then also a section for HRW and the preference-based DF. So the next steps for this draft, so we consider this draft to now be a mature draft with multi-vendor support, implementations and adoptions in the field. So this draft is very much ready for adoption.
Any question on this one?
Actually, I think the biggest question is there any feedback that we received that we have not addressed in this new version of the draft? The second draft, the changes we made to the L2 Gateway proto draft is to add or to flesh out the backward compatibility section. So we clarified a few things and expanded that section. So we went into more detail of the 2ESI solution and how this draft improves upon that 2ESI solution, but we actually went through all the steps of how this can also be achieved with a 2ESI solution. Then based on some feedback, we also added a section addressing essentially the route resolution of a remote PE that operates in strict 7432 mode. Because if you recall in the proto draft, essentially we're claiming a third load balancing bit in the ESI label extended community. And remote PEs may not understand this new bit, and they would essentially then operate in all active mode. So we addressed that in this new section. So the convergence and the mobility sections we already addressed after the last two IETFs ago, based on feedback we received. So this 0.5 version of draft, if you go over the diff, I'm really sorry about that, but we switched from the source from NROF to XML, so there's quite a bit of formatting noise in there. So the next steps for this one, essentially it is still a working document, so we do still welcome comments and feedback, but the document would be ready to progress based on feedback.
Jorge Rabadan, Nokia. I still find a few things quite confusing in the draft, and I can send you guys an email later. But so one of the things is the draft is valid for pure layer 2 and also for IRB.
Yes. On
the ring keys. And at some point you talk about using ARB probes when you have a Mac flash in one of the PEs. But it isn't clear to me if it works in the pure layer 2 scenario or not, because in that case, you may not even know the ARP entries of the connected hosts.
Okay, so maybe we can talk afterwards. Okay. I'm not sure which section that would be.
All right, yeah, I can let you know. The other comment is in the past, I suggested to use for the Mac Flash message to the Mac Mobility Extended community, and that it seems that you guys added that, but still you're calling it Mac Flash Extended community, and in the IANA section, you are requesting a value for it, which is not needed.
Oh, that would be that would be a mistake.
Okay, and a few other things that we can take offline.
Sure.
Thank you.
Linda?
so much. Okay, good afternoon. Okay, so this time we got some comments from the mailing list and also from IETF 105 about this BGP usage for SD-WAN. This time I'm primarily just go through different scenario, how we use BGP to scale SD-WAN. So the purpose is really to show to the other SDOs or industry places, like for example, MAP has this SD-WAN project. They have lots of debates on how to achieve some of this management on the IPsec tunneling, and using BGP actually make it very, very nice solution. So this, it just shows the, see, for example, in this case, you may have, I'm just using one CPE, CPE2 as an example. CPE2 have 3 attached routes, and with the regular BGP update, you basically have the routes encoded in the NLRI path attribute, and using the tunnel in cap to indicate detailed property of the tunnel. And true that tunnel in cap today doesn't have the IPsec properties encoded. In IDR, there is a draft discussing how do we add that particular IPsec. So the one difference in the IPsec is in a way that is very different than our traditional configuration. Normally, when you configure IPsec, which is always the point-to-point protocol, like for example, on the node CPE2, when you configure IPsec, you usually have to configure who's your remote end and who's your remote subnet. For example, for the CPE1, you have orange and green subnets, and you can create 2 separate IPsec tunnels, one for the orange, one for the green. And you could also just create one tunnel like CPE3, aggregating all the routes into one IPsec. And in this example, all the CPE1, CPE2, and CPE3 are in their own administrative domain, and also their own route reflector. And it is through the route reflector that distribute the IPsec tunnel information. So that by doing that, we eliminate the need to go through the certificate process. Like in the traditional IPsec point-to-point, you have to basically configure who's your certificate and who's your remote end certificate. So when you receive a request, you can validate your certificate and then be able to establish that. So we assume in this SD-WAN case, we have a route reflector and which has a policy to determine where this update is forwarded to. You could have a network consist of hundreds of nodes, and this route reflector basically sending to like CPE1, CPE3. Another thing is those routes attached to the CPEs, they are not routable in the underlay WAN network. And so it is very important in the BGP update to include the next hop, which with a routable address, so that remote end can establish, actually can ping you or can test whether this node is reachable or not. So that's slightly different than our traditional MPLS VPN. So that's one example with aggregating all the routes, and so you only need to send one BGP update to the route reflector. So this example shows the fine-grained encryption, meaning that for the 3 different routes attached to CPE2, each of them have their own IPsec tunnels. So with that, you need to send 3 different updates. So this shows that the BGP like CPE2 was in update 1 with the first route encoded in the NLRI path attribute, and then IPsec property in the tunnel in cap. Then there's an update 2, and then there's update 3. So similarly, you can allow the remote end to aggregate all the routes, or you can do individually. As in the IDR, the draft talks about remote, local pairs. That configuration is very complicated. It works well when you just have 2 nodes talking to each other, but when you have multiple nodes, they become a really big mess. So in this case, we're using BGP to update their own information. For example, CP2, his authentication method, whether it's AH authentication or ESP authentication, his public key and route reflector distributed to the other CPEs, which are in the scope to be able to authorize to talk to the CPE2. This is another example which has been discussed a lot in the math recently. They call application-based segmentation in SD-WAN. So for SD-WAN, most people know that there's SD-WAN for the traffic, the path augmentation. Basically, you can aggregate multiple paths. But there's 2 other characteristics. And one of them is based on forwarding based on application ID instead of a destination. So in this example, for the retail business, for example, you could have RED is the one application for the payment system. So for payment system, you can only talk to the payment gateway. You cannot communicate with anybody else. So that particular application only can go to the payment gateway. And for the purple applications, and you can actually is any-to-any mesh. So the 2 cases, assume that this application actually have unique address, then BGP can be used very nicely. We can send 2 update from CPE2's perspective, 1 update to show the red topology, like from CPE2, the red topology is only to payment gateway. So in the you have route attached to this IPsec, attached to this the route encoded in the path NLI path attribute, and you have the tunnel to describe that the tunnel is only from gateway to you. Then for the purple one, you can have all the routes, and then you can indicate different tunnels with different locations. So that works pretty well. But there are some cases where the red application and the purple application actually coming from same IP address. That can be problematic. So that one actually, I didn't address that in this document. And if people know how to do it, welcome to this, send it to mailing list, give some suggestions on how to do it. Okay, so this example shows that just from CPE2's perspective, because IPsec tunnel is all point-to-point, so you need to establish all the point-to-point tunnels. So that's a lot of configurations. This is just 1 node, and then from all the CPEs, they need to, each of them need to have this, basically it's n square problem. This scenario we've been discussed on the mailing list, so that it could be possible we treat IPsec as the transport tunnel, meaning that connecting the nodes together through the untrusted network, and then the traffic can be routed, meaning that each of the CPE will process the BGP update propagated by the route reflector, and based on the BGP update, it can build up the forwarding table and then can route to the destination. So with this, the number of IPsec tunnels to be created are much, much less. But then this introduced a new problem, which is the traffic engineering, right? So for the path between CPE1 to CPE4, you can have 2 different ways to reach, right? So how do you engineer that so that the path can be going through deterministic method? So that's one thing has to be considered. That's it. This is just in addition to IETF 105, we describe the basic the SD1, how BGP use it, and this from 105 to now, we added a more detailed packet walkthrough, the control signal walkthrough. And so hopefully we can ask for working group adoption. And with the working group adoption, we can bring it to other places like math, or to show, hey, IETF's BGP actually is very good, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel or do another thing. Just use this to achieve what you need. That's it.
Any question? Who has read the document? Okay, few people. Maybe you have to socialize a little bit your document.
So can I those pictures?
Yeah, request some feedback on the mailing list.
Okay, I will do that. Maybe I'll do one by one. I notice that if I send too much information, people ignore it. Okay, thank you very much.
I'm the next one.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. So this draft is a kind of follow-up of the discussion we've started in Montreal. So there was an issue pointed on the mailing list. It was, I think, back in June, which was that basically regarding VPN Unicast SAFI. So we have multiple RFCs dealing with this. So we have the 4364 dealing with VPN v4 over IPv4 network. We have the 4659, which is dealing with VPN v6 over IPv4 or IPv6 network. And we have the 5549, which is dealing with VPN v4 over an IPv6 network. And the comment that was made on the mailing list was that the 5549 is bringing a kind of inconsistency on how we are encoding the next stop in the BGP update. So usually in the VPN SAFIs, we are encoding the next stop purely for legacy reasons as a VPN IP address. It doesn't have any value, it doesn't bring anything, it's purely for legacy purpose, because at a certain point of time, it was required that the BGP next stop to be from the same AFI-SAFI than the prefix. Again, it's completely useless and it does not make sense, but yeah, that's our legacy. From a pure standardization standpoint, it works. There is no harm and it could work. Because we have, in the 5549, we have a specific BGP capability, which tells that we are in a specific case. So specification, from a pure specification standpoint, it works. However, if we look at how the industry is today, so we have looked at 9 BGP implementation that are shipping now, including all the major vendors. And what we have found is that on these 9 BGP codes, we have 7 of them which are following a consistent way of encoding the next stop, which means that in the case of 5549, they are encoding the next stop using a VPN IP address. So they are consistent, but not compliant with the 5549. And we have 2 codes that are not supporting the feature at all, so no issue. And we haven't found yet any code which is compliant with 5549. So we have an issue from an industry point of view. The issue is not an interoperability issue, because maybe by chance, everyone is interoperable, because at least all the implementations that we have seen are interoperable between each other because they are using this VPN IP next stop. Maybe by chance, but yeah, it's working this way. The issue is more a kind of compliance issue, because all these implementations are not compliant today to the RFC. So what we would like to propose is to change the 5549 to accommodate the reality of the shipping codes today, and the reality of the deployments. Of course, it's not a trivial change to say that blindly we are moving to this regular IP address in the next stop to the VPN IP. But yeah, this is mainly the spirit of IETF, which is mainly driven by running codes. So we really think that this is the way to do. And the other point is, of course, we could get all this implementation to move to compliancy. But what will be the value of changing all the codes? It will be just pain for the customers. It will be pain for the vendors. And also we will possibly introduce bugs in these implementations. Each time you are touching a code, possibly you will introduce new bugs. So it's purely a risk for customers without bringing any value from an industry point of view. Backward compatibility. Of course, if we go to this straight change of changing the 5549, there is no backward compatibility, which means that if, but it is unlikely, there is somewhere an implementation which is compliant with 5549, this implementation will not be compliant anymore, and it will not be interoperable anymore. But main question is, are we really creating any harm? There are three things. First one is, today, there is no possibility to mix an implementation which is consistent with an implementation which is compliant, okay? Because we don't have interoperability between them. So, in case there is an existing deployment somewhere which is using routers that are fully compliant with 5549, this deployment, we will not really break anything because it can keep living like this. It will not be compliant anymore. But if the vendor is not changing its implementation, it's not breaking any deployment. Of course, if he wants to get to the new compliancy, a knob could be added or something to enable a future interop with an additional vendor which is using the VPN IP next up. And for the existing real deployment that we know that are using this VPN IP address today, there is no change at all. And this is really what the spirit that we want to share here is we want to have the less change in the code widely in the industry as we can. So it seems that most of the implementation today are using this VPN IP code. Possibly, yes, there could be somewhere an implementation which is poorly compliant with 5549, but maybe it's just one or two. It may be easier to change this one compared to the massive ones that are already deployed today. In addition to this, in fact, there is a very small thing which is also missing in the 5549, is that it does not address the SAFI 129, which is the VPN v4 multicast address. And we just also would like to add some text that, this SAFI will be exactly, we'll use exactly the same procedure as we do for the VPN v4. So we really think that this is a reasonable proposal because, for us, that's really the spirit of IETF. We are driven by running codes. So, it's a bit unusual here, but we need to accommodate the standard to the running code. Of course, if anyone has any feedback about existing implementations that are fully compliant with 5549 undeployed, we will really be happy to hear about this. Because we need to focus not just on theory. Yes, in theory, this kind of implementation can exist, but based on the feedback that we have, it's really, really unlikely. So we need to focus on what is deployed compared to only theory. Do you have a comment now, Laura?
No, I'm waiting.
Okay. And what we want is really to create as less pain as we can, especially for the customers and that are already using the shipping code. I have one last slide about the process. 5549 is coming from software, which is in the internet area, so even not in our domain. But the VP and SAFI are usually managed in Bess. So if, of course, the working group agree to go to a change of 5549, we would like to have this managed in Bess. We have already engaged discussion with Martin and also with ADs from software, and I think we have almost an agreement on that. Yeah, and again, in case we agree to continue with this kind of work, what do we, and if we agree to respin 5549, what do we do with this document? Do we just forget it and respin 5549, or do we keep it and progress it at the same time as the new 5549 just for history purpose? Yeah, that's it. Laura?
Okay, so first, I kind of agree with most of what you said. I think it's a reasonable plan. We probably should go ahead and do it. The tricky issue is if there is a compliant implementation out there somewhere that we don't know of, what situation do we actually put that vendor in if we change the standard underneath them? So that's something I would actually seek some lawyer or whatever input on this, or discuss it within the IETF leadership or something like that. We've been reluctant to do this type of thing before, and I think we have done it once on the MPLS side.
Okay, that's a good feedback, yeah.
And also, we need to be fairly sure that we've done kind of all we can to actually identify if there is such a compliant implementation out there.
Yeah.
So a little bit more work.
Okay, thank you for the feedback.
Sun Wang from Huawei. I think this proposal is reasonable. We should adopt this work. Okay, thank you.
Martin Azedi. Thank you for that work, because I think it was needed. I won't speak in the name of Eric, but we are fine with that progressing in Bess if the working group decides to pursue that topic. Laura, I'm not aware of any habits of involving lawyers in our decision process, so I'm not sure we can do that. I'm willing to bring that to the IESG, but involving lawyers, I'm not sure. And I have one question. What form would that take? Maybe I missed it. Is that a BIS? Is that a
5549 BIS? Yeah.
So
we can't really have a draft updating 5549.
When we do BIS, we happen to change the technical content, no? So we wouldn't be doing something beneath anyone.
Well, if I have a compliant implementation and you change the standard, you actually changed my market situation quite a bit. Hope we agree there. I'm not saying that it is the case, but I say there is a potential case, and that we should actually look for and make sure that there is no compliant implementation hanging around somewhere. I don't know about lawyers. I just kind of, I would seek advice from the people that could advise me. That's what I'm saying. And I think you will actually release a new RFC with a new RFC number. So I think that's a pretty sure way of doing it also.
John?
John Scudder. Yeah, thanks for the careful analysis. It's pretty convincing. I think you should do it. Actually, I mean, a few weeks ago when I first heard about this thing, I was sort of like more in the position that I guess Loa finds himself in. At this point, I find myself convinced that you've already been diligent enough, and as both Loa and Martin said, you changed the RFC number. You know, old implementations are still compliant with 5549. New implementations are compliant
an
with the new
existing
number.
deployment of 5549 will not be broken.
Okay, Patelarkas. Speaking as a co-author and a working group member, I think this is a good work. We should do it ASAP. If we are too paranoid about any compliant implementations out here, we could probably use the same Afisafi and use new capability and get done with it, like how we did the RFC 3107 respin.
AC Land of Cisco. I think the fact that anybody that's interoperating today would be broken, and the fact that we're doing it through a biz document, which will take a minimum of a year, that should be enough time for any nascent or implementations to be discovered. I think this is much to do about nothing. The fact that we haven't found one just in, you know, the survey that you took the time to do. So I think this is I think this is kind of ridiculous. We can change the standard anytime we want. There's no, you know, as long as we get consensus across the IETF.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, Eric Vink. I'm here as the Internet AD responsible for software. Just for information, software will be closed on this Friday, so the job needs to be done somewhere else.
Okay.
John Scudder, one thing I forgot to say before is actually in terms of diligence and sort of hypothetical other implementations, probably the most important thing is to get a new version out, at least in, you know, some rough draft form that, you know, updates 5549 so that somebody, I wonder actually if you can even use an errata to indicate this. Basically what would be most embarrassing right now is for someone to come along, find 5549 and implement it newly. It's not very likely, but it would be quite embarrassing.
Thank you.
Okay, Patelarkas, that would be us. So sooner the better.
I agree, yeah.
All right, so it sounds like we need to move forward as ASAP to prevent anybody, as much as anything, to prevent anybody else implementing anything in the meantime that is compliant but not consistent. Okay, thank you. And I think that's us done for today. So we have a few extra minutes. Thank you.
Do we have all the blue sheets?
Actually, there's one set of blue sheets still somewhere in the room. If you have it near you, do you mind bringing it to the front, please? Thank you.
So ours is available. Yeah. All of that content. The question is, do we just forget to draft and start a new draft called C549 bits?
In the updated guys. But yeah, I'll have to
You're saying in the brain. Using G80 or
Right.